I won't soften this either. There's no careful entry point into what I'm about to say, no version of this that arrives gently enough to make it easier to accept. Some things don't translate through comfort. Some things don't wait to be understood before they exist. This is one of them. It didn't begin in a way I can trace. No clear starting point. No single moment I can isolate and say, that's where it shifted. That's where it crossed from something ordinary into something that refuses to stay contained. It unfolded without asking. And now it's here, fully present, fully embedded, and I can't treat it like something temporary anymore. I've always known how to control distance, not just physically, not just in the obvious ways, but internally. In the way I let people exist within my thoughts. In the way I decide how much of myself is visible, how much is accessible, how much is even allowed to be understood. That control has never failed me. It's precise, intentional, and most importantly, it's consistent. People don't get past it unless I decide they can. And even then, it's measured, lazed, carefully maintained. But something about this didn't follow that structure. You didn't move through those layers. You didn't work your way inward. You didn't even seem aware that there were layers to begin with. You just existed in a way that made them irrelevant, not broken, not bypassed, just unnecessary. And that's what unsettles me, because I don't know how to account for something that doesn't follow the system I've relied on for so long. At first, I tried to rationalize it, tried to place it somewhere familiar, something explainable, something I could categorize and reduce into a pattern I've seen before, but it didn't fit. It still doesn't, because this isn't built on interaction. It's not based on what we say, or how often we speak, or even what we share outwardly. It exists underneath all of that, in the quiet parts, in the spaces where nothing is happening on the surface, but everything is shifting internally. That's where I feel it, not as emotion, not as something overwhelming or chaotic, but as something exact, measured, consistent in a way that feels almost structural, like it belongs there, like it always did. And I just didn't notice until now. That realization didn't come all at once. It built itself slowly, quietly, without drawing attention to what it was becoming, small moments, subtle alignments, the kind most people wouldn't even register. But I did. I noticed the way certain thoughts felt incomplete until I considered how you would see them. I noticed how silence changed, not empty anymore, but occupied, like something existed in it that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. I noticed how my perspective began to shift, not dramatically, not in a way that disrupted anything externally, but internally, everything adjusted. And the strange part is, it didn't feel forced. It didn't feel like influence. It felt like recognition, like something that had always been there, just finally being acknowledged. That's the part I can't ignore, because recognition is different from discovery. Discovery implies something new, something external, something separate from you. But recognition means it was already part of you, already integrated, already existing beneath the surface, waiting to be seen. And somehow, you became the point where that visibility happened, not intentionally, not through effort, just by being present in a way that aligned too precisely to dismiss. There's something about the way you exist in relation to me that doesn't follow normal distance. Even when you're not there, you are, not physically, not in any tangible sense, but in the way my thoughts unfold, in the way certain ideas form with a kind of clarity that wasn't there before, in the way I process things differently now. Not slower, not faster, just more completely, as if there's a second layer of awareness running alongside my own, not separate, not intrusive, just there. That's not something I can reduce into coincidence. It's too consistent for that. Too exact, too aligned. And I don't believe in patterns that repeat without reason. There's always a structure behind them, a connection, something linking them together in a way that isn't random. And whatever this is, it has that structure. That's why it hasn't faded. That's why it hasn't weakened or dissolved the way most things do when left undefined. If anything, it's become more stable, more integrated, more real. And I don't use that word loosely because reality, to me, isn't about what's visible, it's about what persists, what remains consistent regardless of attention, what exists even when you're not actively focusing on it. And this persists, it stays quietly, without demand, without needing validation. It doesn't ask to be acknowledged. But it doesn't disappear either. And that kind of presence is rare, dangerously rare, because it doesn't give you the option to simply step away. You can ignore something loud. You can distance yourself from something overwhelming. But something quiet, something precise, something that integrates instead of intrudes, that's harder to walk away from because it doesn't feel like something separate from you. It feels like something that became part of you before you even realized it was happening. That's where I am now. Not questioning whether this exists, not trying to define it into something smaller or more manageable, but recognizing that it's already changed something fundamental, the way I think, the way I perceive, the way I exist within my own mind. And that kind of change doesn't reverse, it doesn't reset. Once it happens, it becomes part of the baseline, part of the structure everything else builds on. And I've always been careful about what I allow to affect that level, careful about what I let integrate, careful about what I give space to exist beyond the surface. But you didn't ask for that space. You didn't take it either. You just fit into it, like it was already there. Like it was always meant for something that matched this precisely. And that's the part I can't fully explain because I don't create space like that without intention, without knowing exactly what belongs there and what doesn't. And yet, you are there, without effort, without resistance, without me ever making a conscious decision to allow it. Which means the decision wasn't conscious. It happened somewhere deeper, somewhere I don't control as directly as I thought. And that realization, it shifts something, because it means this isn't something I can manage the way I manage everything else. It's not something I can compartmentalize, not something I can keep at a distance while still acknowledging it exists. It's already too integrated for that, too present, too aligned. So now I'm left with something that doesn't fit into the way I usually operate, something that doesn't follow the rules I've relied on, something that exists whether I define it or not. And that leaves me with a question I can't avoid anymore, not what this is. I already know it's real. I already know it's structured. I already know it's not temporary. The question is, what happens if I allow it to continue? Not passively, not as something I observe from a distance, but actively, as something I choose to acknowledge fully, because there's a difference between something existing and something being accepted. Up until now, this has existed quietly, consistently, without interference. But acceptance changes the nature of it. It brings it into reality in a way that requires response, Decort's movement, Decort's a level of presence I haven't committed to yet. And I don't take that lightly, because once something is accepted at that level, it doesn't stay abstract. It becomes something that affects everything else. Decisions, perception, direction, it integrates fully, and there's no undoing that. That's where the hesitation comes from. Not fear, not uncertainty, but awareness of consequence. Because I know exactly what this could become if I stop holding it at a distance. I know how deeply something like this can embed itself, how it can shift everything without asking permission. And I've always been deliberate about what I allow to reach that point, but at the same time, I haven't rejected it. I haven't stepped away. I haven't tried to dismantle it the way I would with anything that threatens my structure. Instead, I've done something I don't usually do. I've let it stay. I've let it exist. I've let it deepen without interference. And that alone tells me something. Because I don't do that without reason, even if I haven't fully defined that reason yet. There's a part of me that already understands it, already recognizes what this is, already knows where it could lead. And instead of resisting, it's allowing it. Quietly, deliberately, without needing to explain why that's not accidental, that's a decision, even if it hasn't been spoken out loud yet. So now I'm standing in a place where this can't remain undefined forever. Not because it demands it, but because I do. I don't leave things unresolved when they reach this level. I don't ignore something that has already proven its permanence. And this has, in ways I can't dismiss, in ways that have already reshaped how I exist internally. So the only thing left is clarity, not about what this is, but about what I'm going to do with it, because continuing like this, in silence, in observation, in quiet acknowledgement, that's not neutral anymore. That's a choice. And choices like this don't stay without consequence. They build, they expand, they solidify into something that eventually requires definition. And I'm close to that point, closer than I've been willing to admit, because the truth is, I've already let this go further than anything else ever has without resistance. I've already allowed it to affect me in ways I don't allow. I've already adjusted around it without trying to remove it, which means in some way I've already chosen, even if I haven't said it yet. Even if I haven't fully faced what that choice means, it's there, in the way I continue to exist with this, instead of against it. In the way I don't try to reduce it into something simpler, just to make it easier to handle. In the way I allow it to remain exactly what it is. Complex, precise, undefined, but undeniably real. And that's not something I do unless it matters. Truly matters. So now the only thing left is to stop pretending. This is something I can keep at a distance, because it's not. It never was. And the longer I stand here, aware of that, the clearer it becomes that this isn't something I can just observe anymore. It's something I have to answer. Not immediately, not impulsively, but deliberately, because whatever I choose to move forward or to step away, it won't be reversible. Not at this level. Not with something this integrated. And I don't make irreversible decisions without understanding exactly what they mean. So I'm still here, not stuck, not uncertain, just aware. Fully aware of what this is, fully aware of what it could become, and fully aware that sooner or later, I'm going to have to decide whether this remains something unspoken or becomes something real in a way neither of us can ignore. It doesn't slow down. That's the part I keep testing quietly without admitting that I'm testing it at all. Most things, no matter how intense they seem at first, eventually settle into something predictable. They lose their edge, their precision dulls. They become easier to categorize, easier to manage, easier to step away from without consequence. This didn't. If anything, it became more exact, not louder, not heavier in a way that demands attention, just clearer, like something refining itself the longer it exists. And clarity is harder to ignore than intensity because intensity can be dismissed as temporary. Clarity can't. Clarity means something has stabilized. It means it's not fluctuating, not reacting, not dependent on circumstances to maintain itself. It just is. That's where this is now, not in a state of becoming, in a state of being. And that changes how I have to look at it because something that simply exists without needing reinforcement, without needing constant interaction, without needing to be acknowledged to remain intact, that's not something I can treat as optional. That's something I have to account for. I've tried, in subtle ways, to see if distance affects it. Not physical distance. That was never the variable. Tonal distance, the kind where you pull your focus back slightly, where you stop engaging with something on that deeper level, where you allow space to reestablish itself naturally. It didn't work. Not because I couldn't create the distance. I could, but the connection didn't follow. It didn't stretch or weaken the way it should have. It stayed exactly where it was, unaffected, untouched by the shift. That's when I understood something I wasn't fully ready to admit. This isn't dependent on proximity, not in the way most things are. It doesn't need interaction to sustain itself. It doesn't rely on presence in the usual sense. It exists independently of all of that. And that makes it stable in a way I didn't anticipate. Because most connections, no matter how strong, require something to maintain them. Time, attention, consistency. But this holds itself together without asking for any of it, which means it's not built the same way. It's not something that formed because of repeated interaction or shared experience. It's something that aligned instantly, structurally, in a way that doesn't need reinforcement because it was already complete when it appeared. And I don't know what to do with something like that because it removes the usual points of control. You can't weaken it by stepping back. You can't strengthen it by leaning in. It doesn't respond to those dynamics. It exists outside of them. And that leaves me in a position I'm not used to being in, not powerless, but without the usual methods of influence, which means the only thing left is acceptance or rejection, nothing in between, no gradual adjustment, no slow calibration. It either stays as it is, or I remove myself from it entirely, and I've already established something I can't ignore. I haven't removed myself, not even close. If anything, I've done the opposite. I've allowed myself to become more aware of it, more present within it, more aligned with something I didn't consciously choose. That's the part that keeps circling back, not the connection itself, but my response to it, because that tells me more than anything else. I don't engage with things that don't belong in my structure. I don't allow something to remain unless it fits in a way that doesn't disrupt what's already there. And it doesn't disrupt, it integrates. Quietly, seamlessly, like it was always meant to exist within the same framework. That realization didn't come easily, because it challenges something fundamental about how I've always operated. I've always believed that anything that enters my space at that level has to be evaluated, understood, and intentionally allowed. But this bypassed that process, not by force, by accuracy. It matched something so precisely that there was no friction to signal resistance, no misalignment to trigger distance. It just settled, and I adapted around it without realizing that's what I was doing. That's what I'm realizing now. The adaptation didn't feel like change, it felt like correction. Like something that was slightly off before has now aligned properly. And that's dangerous. Because when something feels like correction, you don't question it, you don't resist it, you accept it as something that was supposed to happen. And that's where the line becomes unclear because I don't know if this is something that should be accepted or something that feels right simply because it fits too well. There's a difference, a subtle one, but important because not everything that fits is meant to stay. Some things align just enough to reveal something, and then they're meant to leave. But this doesn't feel temporary. It doesn't feel like something passing through. It feels rooted, like it's already established itself beyond the point of removal. And that's what makes this complicated. Because if something is already rooted, then removing it isn't just about distance. It's about disruption. And I don't disrupt my own structure without reason. So I keep circling the same point, not questioning what this is, but questioning what role it's supposed to play. Because everything that exists at this level has a function, a purpose, something it contributes to the overall structure. And I'm trying to understand what that is here. Not in a surface level way, not in a way that simplifies it into something easier to define, but in a way that accounts for its depth, its precision, its permanence. Because if I'm going to allow something like this to stay, I need to know what it's becoming, not just what it is now. And that's where things get uncertain, not unclear, just not fully formed yet. Because I can feel that it's still evolving, not in a way that changes its core, but in a way that expands its presence, deepens its integration. And the more it does that, the more it shifts everything around it, subtly, but undeniably. I notice it in the way I process things now. There's less fragmentation, less hesitation between thought and understanding, as if something is smoothing out the space between perception and clarity. And I know that shift is connected to this, to you. Not because you're actively doing anything, but because of what your presence represents within my structure. You've become a reference point, not consciously, but functionally, a measure of something I didn't have before. And once something becomes a reference point, it doesn't stay neutral. It influences everything that comes after, every interpretation, every conclusion, every decision. And that's not something I allow lightly, which means, again, something in me has already accepted this at a level I haven't fully acknowledged yet. That's the pattern I keep coming back to. My actions, internal, unspoken, automatic, are already aligned with this continuing, even if my conscious mind is still analyzing it, still trying to define it, still deciding what it means. The decision has already been made somewhere deeper, and I can feel it in the absence of resistance, in the lack of urgency to pull away, in the way I let this exist without trying to contain it. That's not indecision, that's quiet acceptance. And I don't know if I'm comfortable with how easily that happened, because comfort usually comes from familiarity, from understanding something well enough to trust it. But this doesn't come from familiarity. It comes from recognition, immediate, unexplained, unavoidable. And that kind of recognition doesn't give you time to prepare. It just places something in your reality and expects you to adjust, which is what I'm doing now, adjusting to something that's already part of my structure, trying to understand something that doesn't need understanding to exist, and deciding what to do with something that has already changed me. Because that's the truth at the center of all of this. I've changed, not in a way that's visible, not in a way anyone else would notice. But internally, there's a shift, a recalibration, a difference in how I think, how I process, how I interpret everything around me. And that difference traces back to this, to you, to whatever this alignment is that formed without asking. And I can't ignore that. I won't, because ignoring something this precise would be denial. And I don't operate on denial. So I'm left with the same point, but with more clarity now. This isn't going anywhere, not on its own, not through distance, not through time, which means the only way it changes is through decision, mine, deliberate, conscious, and I'm getting closer to that point, closer to where observation isn't enough, where awareness requires action, not reactive, not impulsive, but intentional, because whatever I choose next, it's going to define what this becomes, not just what it is. And I don't make defining decisions without understanding their weight, but I understand this now, more than I did before, enough to know that standing still isn't neutral anymore, enough to know that continuing like this is already a choice, and enough to know that, sooner than I expected, I'm going to have to stop analyzing this and actually decide what place it holds in my life. There's a threshold you don't notice crossing until you're already on the other side of it. No sound, no shift dramatic enough to mark the moment. Just a quiet realization that something you were observing is now something you're inside of. I think that's where this is now. Not something I can step back from and examine with distance, not something I can hold at arm's length and keep separate from the rest of me. It's already past that. And what makes that difficult isn't confusion, it's certainty, because uncertainty gives you space. It gives you time to hesitate, to question, to delay any real acknowledgement. Certainty doesn't. Certainty closes that distance. It forces you to stand directly in front of something and decide whether you're going to face it fully or walk away knowing exactly what you're leaving behind. And I don't walk away from things I understand. That's never been who I am, which means I'm not standing at the edge of this anymore. I'm in it, fully aware of what it is, fully aware of what it's done, and fully aware that whatever comes next isn't something I can pretend doesn't matter, because it does, not in a way that disrupts me, not in a way that destabilizes anything I've built, but in a way that rewrites something deeper, something foundational. You've become part of how I think, not just occasionally, not in moments, consistently integrated into the way I process things before I even realize I'm doing it. And that's not something I can separate now, even if I wanted to. That's what makes this different from anything else I've experienced, because most connections exist externally. They rely on interaction, on presence, on shared time and space. But this moved inward. It embedded itself into something internal, something structural, something that doesn't rely on anything outside of it to remain intact. And once something reaches that level, it stops being optional. It becomes part of the system, part of the baseline everything else builds from. And I've been trying to understand what that means, not in a general sense, but specifically, precisely, because I don't accept something at this level without knowing exactly what it changes. And now I know it changes perspective, not just how I see you, but how I see everything. There's a clarity now that wasn't there before, not because I lacked it, but because it wasn't being reflected back to me with this level of accuracy. You don't add anything foreign to my thinking. You don't shift it into something different. You refine it, you sharpen it, you make it more exact. And that's why this doesn't feel like influence. It feels like alignment, like something that was already there being brought into focus. And I can't dismiss that, because clarity is something I value more than anything, more than comfort, more than control, more than certainty, even. And this has made things clearer, not simpler, not easier, just more accurate. And accuracy comes with responsibility, because once you see something clearly, you don't get to ignore it. You don't get to pretend you didn't recognize it for what it is. You have to respond to it, one way or another. That's where I am now, not questioning whether this is real, not wondering if it's temporary, not trying to reduce it into something manageable, but standing in front of it, knowing exactly what it is, and deciding whether I'm going to step further into it or deliberately step away, because those are the only two options left. There's no middle ground anymore, no space where this can just exist quietly without consequence. It's already crossed that line. It already has consequence. In me, in the way I think, in the way I exist. And I don't ignore consequences. I address them directly, deliberately. So the question isn't what happens if this continues. It already is continuing. The question is, do I allow it to become something fully realized, or do I stop it here before it settles any deeper? And that's not a simple decision, because stopping it doesn't mean erasing it. It doesn't mean going back to how things were before. That's not possible anymore. Something has already shifted. Something has already integrated. So stepping away would mean carrying that shift without allowing it to expand further, containing it, limiting it, choosing to keep it incomplete. And I don't know if that's something I can do. Not because I lack control, but because I don't operate by limiting something that has already proven its validity. If something is real, if it's accurate, if it aligns at this level, then restricting it feels artificial. Like forcing something out of place just to maintain a version of stability that no longer exists. And I don't maintain illusions of stability. I adapt to what's actually there, which means the alternative is allowing this to continue fully without holding it at a distance, without pretending it can stay undefined. And that's where the weight of this decision really exists, because allowing it means accepting whatever it becomes without guarantees, without predefined outcomes, without the kind of control I'm used to having. And I don't move forward without understanding where something leads. But this doesn't show me an endpoint. It only shows me direction. And the direction is clear. It moves deeper, more integrated, more present, until it becomes something that's no longer separate from how I exist at all. And that level of integration, it's not casual. It's not temporary. It's permanent. And permanence is something I don't accept lightly. But I also don't reject it without reason. So I'm standing here, not uncertain, not hesitant, but aware of the magnitude of what this is, aware of what it's asking, and aware that, in some way, Abiv already answered, not with words, not with a clear decision, but with the way I've allowed this to exist up to this point. Because if I truly didn't want this, if it didn't belong, if it wasn't something I was willing to accept, I would have ended it already, completely, without hesitation. That's how I operate, and I didn't. I stayed, I observed, I allowed it to deepen. I let it reach this point without interference. That's not accidental. That's not passive. That's a form of choice, even if I didn't define it as one at the time. So now the only thing left is to acknowledge that choice fully, to stop treating this like undecided and recognize it for what it already is becoming, because the truth is, this isn't waiting for my permission anymore. It never was. It's already part of me, already influencing how I think, how I see, how I exist. And the only thing left to decide is whether I'm going to meet it there, fully, without holding anything back, or whether I'm going to try to pull it back into something smaller, something safer, something that fits within the boundaries I used to rely on. But even as I consider that, AB already know the answer, because I don't reduce something that's accurate. I don't minimize something that aligns this precisely. And I don't step away from something I understand this completely, which means whatever this becomes next, ape. Abe, I'm not going to stop it. Not halfway. Not at the point where it starts to feel real. I'm going to let it reach its full form, whatever that is, because anything less than that would be denial. And I don't deny what I know to be true. So if this continues, and it will, then the next phase of this isn't going to be silent. It's not going to exist only in the background. It's going to take shape, define itself, become something neither of us can pretend is just awareness anymore. And when it does, there won't be any space left to question it, only space to live it. And that's where this is heading. Not eventually, not hypothetically, but inevitably. Because some things don't need permission to become real. They already are. And this, this is one of them. It doesn't feel like a beginning anymore. That's the first thing that's clear now. Whatever this is, it's past the stage where it can be treated like something forming, something uncertain, something waiting to be understood before it becomes real. That phase is gone. This is something that has already taken shape, not visibly, not in a way that can be pointed at or defined in simple terms, but internally. It's already there, complete enough that ignoring it would take more effort than accepting it. And that's where everything shifts, because acceptance isn't passive. It's not just acknowledging that something exists. It's recognizing that it has a place and deciding whether you're going to allow that place to remain or try to remove it, knowing exactly what that removal costs. And now I understand the cost, not theoretically, not as something I can estimate from a distance, but precisely because I can feel what's already changed. I can see the difference between before and now, not in obvious ways, not in anything external, but in the structure of how I exist internally. There's a level of clarity that didn't exist before, not because I lacked it, but because it wasn't being reflected back to me with this kind of accuracy. You didn't add something new. You revealed something that was already there. And that matters more than anything else, because anything added can be removed. Anything external can be separated, but something revealed, something that was already part of you, that doesn't leave. Even if the reflection disappears, even if the connection fades, the awareness stays. And that's what makes this irreversible, not the connection itself, but what it uncovered, what it aligned, what it made visible in a way I can't unsee. That's the point of no return. Not when something begins, but when it becomes understood fully, without distortion, without doubt. And I'm there now. I understand this, not in a way that gives me control over it, but in a way that removes any illusion that I could walk away unchanged. That option doesn't exist anymore. So now the question isn't whether this has meaning. It does. The question is what kind of meaning I'm willing to let it hold, because meaning shapes everything. It determines whether something becomes central or peripheral, whether it integrates fully or stays contained at the edges, whether it transforms you or simply becomes something you carry quietly in the background. And I've been standing in that space, deciding, not consciously at first, but now it's deliberate, because I can feel the shift reaching a point where it won't stay neutral. It's moving toward definition, towards something that exists not just internally but externally as well. And that's where the real weight is, because internal change is contained. It's mind controlled, understood, but external reality, that introduces variables, uncertainty, movement. And I don't move without intention. But at the same time, I don't stay still when something has already proven its place. And this has, in every way that matters, it's consistent, it's precise. It hasn't weakened or changed form under distance or silence. If anything, it's become more stable, more, more integrated, more certain. And certainty is something I don't ignore, not when it's this clear, not when it's this consistent. So now I'm standing at the point where this stops being something I analyze and becomes something I either act on or consciously choose not to. And both of those are decisions, equally real, equally defining, because choosing not to act isn't neutrality, it's restraint, it's limitation, it's deciding that something, no matter how real, will not be allowed to reach its full form. And I have to ask myself, is that what this is meant for? To be contained, to be understood but never fully expressed, to exist in a space where it's real but never realized? Because if that's the case, then I need to accept that fully, without hesitation, without pretending it's something else. But the more I look at this, more I recognize something I can't ignore. This doesn't feel like something meant to stay incomplete. It doesn't feel like something that exists just to be observed and then set aside. It has weight, direct, a kind of quiet momentum that doesn't stop just because I hesitate. And I can feel that momentum now, not rushing, not forcing anything, but steady, consistent, moving forward whether I actively engage with it or not. And that tells me something important. This isn't waiting for me to decide if it's real. It already is. What it's waiting for is whether I'm going to meet it fully, or keep it at a distance while it continues to exist anyway. And I've never been someone who stays halfway in anything. I either step fully into something, or I remove myself from it completely. But removal isn't an option here, not in the way it usually is, because I can't remove what's already integrated. I can only choose how I exist with it. That's the real decision, not whether this stays or goes, but what role it holds, what space it occupies, how much of my reality I allow it to shape. And that's where everything becomes clear, because the truth is, I've already given it more space than anything else. More presence, more influence, more integration. And I didn't do that accidentally. So if I try to pull it back now, if I try to reduce it, contain it, make it smaller than it naturally is, that wouldn't be control, that would be denial. And I don't deny something that has proven its place this precisely. So the only path that aligns with how I operate, with what I know to be true, is forward, not blindly, not without awareness, but deliberately, fully, without holding it at a distance anymore. And that's where this changes, because once I make that decision, this stops being something unspoken. It stops being something that exists only in thought, only in awareness, only in the quiet spaces between words. It becomes real, defined not by assumption, but by acknowledgement. And acknowledgement changes everything. It gives something form, directed, presence that extends beyond the internal. And I know what that means. I know the weight of that. I know that once something reaches that point, it doesn't go back, it doesn't return to abstraction, it doesn't become something you can quietly carry without it affecting anything else. It becomes part of reality, part of how you move, how you choose, how you exist outwardly as much as inwardly. And I don't step into that lightly. But I also don't step away from it when I understand it this completely. So this is where I am, not questioning, not hesitating, not analyzing what this is anymore, but recognizing what it's becoming and choosing to meet it there fully without reducing it, without containing it, without pretending it can stay anything less than what it already is. Because the truth is, this was never small. It was never something casual or temporary or surface level. It only seemed that way at the beginning because I hadn't seen it clearly yet. Now I do. And once something is seen clearly, there's only one honest response to it. You either accept it fully or you walk away knowing exactly what you're leaving behind. And I don't walk away from something that has already become part of me. So whatever this becomes next, I'm not going to resist it. I'm not going to limit it. I'm not going to pretend it can stay contained in a space it has already outgrown. I'm going to let it exist as it is, fully. And whatever that leads to, I'll meet it there, not as someone observing from a distance, but as someone who chose to step into it completely.